everyone. Welcome to our first Earth3 seminar session. And so as many of you are aware, our departmental strategic priorities this year are advising and equity and inclusion. So we are really lucky to have experts in the house. So Dr. Tamara Bertrand Jones, she is our associate chair and also award-winning professors in the area of advising, research, teaching, and professional service. And we have Brittany, Brewster, a PhD student in higher education program, and they're going to share their research on graduate advising from a Black feminist approach. So thank you, Tamara and Brittany.
Thank you so much, Dr. Akiba. As a part of our presentation today, before we got started, we wanted to just acknowledge that we stand on the indigenous lands of the Appalachian Nation, the Miccosukee tribe of Florida, the Muskogee Creek Nation, and the Seminole tribe of Florida. As educators, we think that it is important for us to acknowledge the violent and painful past that has allowed Florida State University to be here. We'd also like to make sure that we honor the history, the knowledge, and the contributions of these tribes and their peoples as we share with you today. So welcome to our Relevant Research Roundtable series. As Dr. Akiba mentioned, two of our departmental priorities this year are establishing shared advising practices and enhancing equity and inclusion. And with Dr. Akiba's blessing and leadership, we are excited to be able to explore these topics with you in all of our work throughout the department. But especially today, we think that our presentation combines both of those actually and creates some really great synergy. In our session on a Black feminist approach to graduate advising, Brittany and I will walk you through a model for graduate advising that's grounded in Black feminist thought. And we'll also share some data from Black doctoral students about their experiences with these tenets and what happens when students don't experience this type of advising, and some recommendations for how advisors, departments, as well as students can take a more proactive approach to their advising relationships. So we're excited to be with you today. Before we also get started, we wanted to acknowledge some others who have contributed to this work. This part of this work is based on an article I wrote with Dr. Latera Osborne-Lampkin and Dr. Jeffrey Ann Wilder. And the research team that we have amassed of Dr. Jessie Ford, Sharina Lofton, Owan Edwards, Adrian Jackson, and Dr. Esty Hernandez have all been very instrumental in contributing to this work that we will share with you today. Brittany, you want to say hey to the people before we move on?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good to see everyone's faces.
Awesome. So the current state of the academy, higher education has not changed drastically since its inception, unfortunately. However, those who participate in higher education have changed drastically. There are more women, more culturally and racially, ethnically diverse, and other minoritized groups are enrolling, matriculating, and participating in graduating from a variety of higher education institutions worldwide. But despite this diversity of constituents, higher education has not, our response to this diversity has been lacking and frankly inadequate, particularly in the way that we train and socialize future faculty. Current socialization processes, well, actually, let me go back. Current socialization processes encourage individuals to adopt the values, the beliefs and norms of the entering organization. And oftentimes there's little attention to the newcomers' diverse contributions, whether those be personal, intellectual, or otherwise. And so these organizations, particularly higher education institutions, were not designed for underrepresented, minoritized populations. And as a result, there have been inadequate socialization experiences to academia. That results in not only added difficulties for emerging scholars in the system, but socializing individuals to these systems often ignores and perpetuates racism, sexism, classism, and other types of oppression, despite the inclusion of these diverse individuals in the current system. So this sets up the distinctions of the terms diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. We're proposing a new model of socialization that's needed, one that is culturally responsive. Part of the culturally responsive socialization model is a process that's comprised of experiences that allow scholars to integrate all forms of knowing and being for optimal success in the academy. So what does this look like? Culturally responsive socialization process and experiences are identity-centered, they are intentional, and they are interconnected. At its core, the culturally responsive model of socialization centers identity and acknowledges the myriad ways that identity helps to shape our work. The importance of responsiveness to emerging scholars' backgrounds, knowledge, and experiences is in designing identity-centered socialization processes, acknowledges and accounts for the intersectionality of multiple identities and the impact of oppression on those identities. It also considers the roles that individuals claim both inside and outside of academia. Why is this important? Because culturally responsive socialization experiences not only acknowledge those multiple identities and those roles that scholars fulfill within and outside of the academy, but they're also intentional about including avenues for a purposeful focus on mind, body, and spirit, or holistic development. This intentionality creates an environment where emerging scholars can explore the ways that their identities continue to impact their professional work. In graduate education, academic preparation, mentoring, and professional development all are traditional domains of socialization, but they're distinct processes within themselves, yet they intertwine in ways that sometimes can confuse emerging scholars and even the senior scholars as to what is the distinct experience that should be occurring in this moment and for what purpose. We suggest that interconnected socialization experiences draw on knowledge from all three of these contexts to further contribute to the emerging scholars' experience. Taken together, all three of these notions of centering identity within an intentionally holistic environment focused on creating an interconnected experience encourages participants to experience socialization as an integrated process in an environment that attends to salient issues of identity that are pertinent to their position in the academy. In essence, culturally responsive socialization is about ensuring that all participants are able to thrive in their chosen environments. So what does this mean for advising? We consider advising a component of academic preparation. And there's lots of research that abounds on advising, particularly about the undergraduate experience and advising. From the work of the National Academic Advising Association, or NACADA, to university departments, academic advising is definitely important to a student's academic journey. Likewise, advising is also a critical component of the doctoral student socialization experience and thus the overall doctoral experience. In culturally responsive socialization, advising is a part of the emerging scholars' academic preparation. Advising relationships, I think that we would all agree that they are pretty important to the development of graduate students' academic, professional, and personal success. Unfortunately, advising as a concept and as a process is often conflated with mentoring. And these are two separate relationships, two separate processes that need to make, that also function in different ways. So for all graduate students, we know that successful advising relationships are contingent upon accurate and relevant information sharing. If you or your advisor are withholding necessary information, that could definitely impede a student's success. For minoritized populations, advising is especially important, given the intersectionality of folks' experiences. This attention, especially to identity, is particularly important at predominantly white institutions, where sometimes this information, this consideration is not a priority. I'm going to turn it over now to Brittany to share with us more about Black feminist thought.
Thank you. So in response to these realities that Dr. Bertrand Jones described, we use Patricia Hill Collins' Black feminist thought to frame our exploration of Black women doctoral students' advising experiences. Black feminist thought is a perspective or a way of knowing born from the intellect of countless Black women within and outside of the academy. That's very important because it centers and holds most valuable the social location of Black women and leans on their experiences, regardless of where they're positioned in society, as affirmation and a source of knowledge. So social location refers to the ways that Black women's race, gender, and class position them at the intersections of interlocking systems of oppression. This is situated in the socio-historical and socio-political experiences of Black women, which are deeply rooted and honestly ever present today. From these realities, Black feminist thought recognizes the unique ways that Black women experience and see the world. And they see that as such value and such contribution to our understanding of our everyday experiences. A primary element of Black feminist thought focuses on the grounding in and the production of knowledge derived from the lived experiences of these women, and in particular, the way that they self-define who they are as Black women and what it means to exist in that reality. It also recognizes that Black women's collective experiences due to this social location it recognizes their location collectively, but also it distinguishes the nuanced ways that their positions with oppression may vary. So if we think about the way that folks identify in terms of gender, class, sexual orientation, and other many multifaceted ways can shift the way that Black women experience oppression. And it recognizes the collective, yet the distinctive, nuanced ways that Black women experience that oppression as a result. And finally, it highlights the power of self-awareness, increased consciousness, and the knowledge production of Black women as a source of activism and change for themselves and broader communities. And so as a way of knowing, Black feminist thought, we've seen through the literature, has been applied in both practical and theoretical realms. And through this application, we've seen it further research as methodology, develop frameworks to further contextualize the way that Black women experience things in the academy, broader educational structures, and medicine, government, leadership. Honestly, it's limitless the way that it's been contextualized. And then finally, we've seen it aid in the facilitation of culturally responsive programs and practices. In thinking about these applications, we've seen how Black feminist thought also amplifies the experiences of other women of color and minoritized groups through the centering of Black women. As a result, we propose and echo that Black feminist thought, though it's centered on Black women, has the capacity to be a liberatory bridge for many communities. So through this application and through our understanding of Black feminist thought, we thought it was important for us to use this in our exploration of the advising experiences of Black women to lean on their knowledge to to further our understanding of this function.
So what does this Black feminist approach to advising look like? As Brittany mentioned, this approach is definitely grounded in the experiences of Black women, but the broader applicability for us is what we would like to reiterate today. There are several responsibilities and functions, as well as characteristics or behaviors that advisors share responsibility for or have responsibility for in their advising relationships. And it's these interconnected ways of being, of knowing and being that are reflected in the relationships that advisors have with their students. And so what are they? What are some of the advisor responsibilities? There are three main advisor responsibilities. One is helping to decode the hidden curriculum. And this is one acknowledges that there is a hidden curriculum in the academy, some underlying ways of being, of knowledge that's oftentimes students from underrepresented populations, first generation students may not be aware of and need to be aware of in order to be successful in the academy. Helping to develop as researchers. Part of our goal or our role and responsibilities as advisors is to help students to be successful in their research endeavors. So how do we do that? And we'll talk a little bit more about that to come. Also, the next responsibility is helping students to develop as professionals. What are their professional aspirations? Do they have faculty aspirations? Do they desire to be administrators or work in policy? So part of our role as an advisor is to know what those expectations are in terms of career and to consider how we could help the student to progress in that area. What are some of the functions of advisors, which are slightly different than those responsibilities? And so there are four main functions that advisors serve. One is developing awareness. And as a part of developing awareness, this is the role or the function of the advisor to become familiar with literature that's related to the student's experience, whether it be a understanding about the different intersecting identities that students bring with them, or just to develop a better understanding of who they are. Advisors also have a validating function, and it's important for this validating function to be able to integrate and to validate the contributions of that individual student to the program, to the department, or to the university. We recognize that students contribute in a variety of different ways. And so part of our roles as advisors is confirming and validating that students are welcome, that their unique contributions are welcomed here and appreciated. The third function of the advisor is to advocate. And in the advocating role, the role here is about promoting and protecting advisees, particularly from deficit views of that individuals or those intersecting identities and their contributions to the academy. And finally, the last advising function is about educating. Our role, of course, as educators, we are in the business of providing education. Our role as educators in this particular role is about educating not only diverse doctoral students, but also our colleagues and our peers about the ways that different students contribute. It also incorporates ways of changing and opening, broadening, looking at diverse perspectives and the ways that we incorporate those into our teaching and advising. Lastly, the advisors, there are certain characteristics or behaviors that kind of guide the advisor-advisee relationship. And these are grounded in certain ethics. Part of Black feminist thought is there's an undergirding ethic of care that it permeates all levels of being, and acknowledging the different experiences that Black women have. And so we felt that this ethics, these different levels of ethics, are particularly important in the advising relationships. And so what are they? This ethic of community is about a relationship that's built upon a communal dialogue. It's about reciprocity and mutual respect and equality. The advising relationship here is not about, it is bi-directional. It's not just about the hierarchy. I am the advisor. I communicate all information. The ethic of empowerment here is the relationship that decenters that traditional power, that decenters the traditional power and authority structure. This relationship, or this ethic, embodies agency and collectivity. The student's concerns become the advisor's concerns, as well as making sure that the student feels that they have a voice in the relationship just as much as the advisor does. The ethic of caring is about the holistic advising relationship that acknowledges that students have and should have roles outside of their academic pursuits. And so this ethic of caring recognizes that the students are, they're whole people. They are individuals. We encourage in this part of the ethic of care that you encourage self-care. You encourage self-exploration so that the advisee has a deeper understanding of who they are and feels as though they can bring that and contribute that to the research that they are pursuing. An ethic of accountability is about the relationship is honest and candid. And just that this to me is a core component of any relationship. We want folks to be able to be honest, to be able to be open and transparent with their advisees. And what this looks like is also holding people accountable and accountable for the things that they have or have not accomplished. We'll share with you some of the quotes from our participants about how this ethic appears or maybe not appears in their relationships with their advisors. And then lastly, this ethic of diverse knowledge. Again, this is very similar to the advisor function of educating. And here, it's the promotion of inclusive epistemological, methodological standpoints and knowledge claims. It's understanding that the traditional ways that we have been taught, or the traditional definitions of what is knowledge or what is the process of knowledge production might be different for diverse students as they engage in research or knowledge production in the academy. So being open to those distinctions. Next, Brittany will share with us some, or actually I will share with us some of the missteps that advisors often make. And we'll share with you also next are some data from our participants about some of the ways that individuals have experienced an environment that those missteps are not so prominent. So several of these missteps include assuming that you know the student's experience based on what little you know about them. Making determinations about students' motivations based on one incident or interaction. When we know that there's a totality of experiences, the student might have had a bad day, or they might be in the middle of a pandemic. And this has definitely an impact on their motivation that might be different than their normal ways of being. Not providing a frank and honest assessment of the student's work and or progress. And then lastly, using our knowledge or our lack of knowledge as a crutch or shield from engaging with the students. In the examples that Brittany will share next, you'll see how some of these missteps advisors have made some of these missteps, but then also what some of the counter to those missteps looks like.
So starting with the ethic of community, the first participant shared, I need to have that trust in you that when I have answers and questions and concerns, you got my back. and I can come to you with those. And for me, it was also like that vulnerability piece that's tied into trust, is that I can have these questions and you're not going to judge me. You're not going to look at me thinking like, oh, hey, little black girl, you really don't know what you're doing. In looking at the ethic of empowerment, another participant shared, one of the things I was very, very frustrated with was I could not get my research questions down pat and articulate enough to convey exactly what it was I intended to use, and I wanted it to sound more scholarly. I just needed help through that process. And when I asked my advisors back at my university, they just kept saying, read more, write more, it'll come to you. And through this process, that's what I was doing, but it still just wasn't coming. So not that I wanted someone to tell me what my research questions were, but to really sit down with me and give me that support to go back and forth and to have time with me to do that, and not only just give me 10 minutes.
This person here, the participant here is a doctoral student that participated in the research boot camp, and she's describing her frustrations with the absence of hands-on support and feeling, and her frustration with needing to feel that support from her advisor and being empowered to move on to the next phase in her research process.
In looking at the ethic of caring, this participant shared, RBC really showed me that you could be successful in academia and still be very down to earth. Do you understand what I'm saying? You can be successful, you can be well published, you can be all these things and still be down to earth and still know what it's like to try to find yourself. Sometimes people get into academia, and as they move forward, they forget. And so not just with the doctor blank, but all the mentors have been human. And that sometimes you don't get that in academia. You don't get the human side. And I don't know whether if it's because faculty have so much pressure that there's no space to be human.
We thought that this quote was just particularly telling, that that faculty have built up this either facade or feel as though they need to maintain this distance between their advisees, and in that distance, students are not experiencing that ethic of care. They don't see faculty being human. They don't see faculty sharing or particularly expressing concern about the students in their outside lives. And so here, the student was sharing that at the boot camp, she was able to experience that ethic of care with her senior scholar.
Ethic of accountability, a participant mentioned, I know it's in my own program. It seems I'm not really sure all the time what my professors mean. It's not just their teaching, but they're an informal conversation. Like when someone says, that's fairly ambitious, I'll be here to support you. That means don't do it. Whereas a Black person will say, I feel like we're pretty straightforward as people. It's like, that's crazy. Don't do that. That's ridiculous.
How many of us have found ourselves reflecting on interactions with people where what they said was not actually what they meant, where there was some undercurrent of something that was there and you couldn't quite figure it out. And so we had a meeting after the meeting where you decoded that experience with someone else. This ethic of accountability holds advisors and students accountable for transparent and open communication. This student here was sharing his experience in his own program where he was sharing with a faculty member his proposed research plan. And the faculty member, instead of telling him, that's crazy, don't do that, that's ridiculous, he said, that's fairly ambitious. I'll be here to support you. That's like, hands off. You go ahead, do what you need to do. You figure out how to work that out, and I'll be here to support you. And the student was later went on to express his frustration with this. And he simply said, why couldn't he just tell me that this was something that I shouldn't do? What was missing from our relationship where he did not feel comfortable telling me that this was a project that I should not pursue? Or maybe help him to rethink the project in new ways, in ways that were a little bit more realistic. So this ethic of accountability here what we like to focus on is this open and frank conversation that sometimes is not the case for students in their advisor relationships.
And then finally, the ethic of diverse knowledge. Yeah, so where I think part of my passion for coming here and committing to myself to coming here is also because I needed very specific guidance. And not having any Black staff in my department at all, any folks that do work similar to what I'm trying to do. And really feeling anxious and scared that I will completely screw up my last research because I don't know what I'm doing, right? So there's people who, from a methodical standpoint, might be able to give me some accurate things, but it's not culturally congruent, or they may have some particular theoretical perspective, or just have had experience getting 100 students through a dissertation, and that's important. But when you're doing work that's really important to you, and in my case, doing work with Black women, I just feel like, and I almost felt irresponsible for me to continue to like move forward without being as proactive as possible, even if I had to go through this and end up paying a lot of money out of pocket to come here to kind of get myself around the right community of people and around scholars.
There's so much to unpack in this quote, and so I want to call your attention to a couple of things. Here, this student, one, exhibited agency in finding, she had to go outside of her home institution to find a place where she felt comfortable, where she felt that she could receive that cultural knowledge that she needed in order to do her work on Black women. Oftentimes, because of the limited number of faculty of color or minoritized faculty of a variety of identities, students are unable, many of the faculty are unable to directly address, whether it be from a disciplinary content or a research methodology, they're not able to directly address what students, diverse students' research experiences or their research topics. And as a result of this, there's a gap in the students' knowledge. And oftentimes, instead of working with the student to find whether it be outside individuals or outside sources of information that students can tap into, students are often left to figure it out on their own. And, students are often discouraged from pursuing topics that might be directly relevant to their experience. We've all heard of students who have been encouraged, or I have heard several times of students who have been encouraged not to pursue topics that dealt with race or dealt with gender or another type of oppression because of the faculty members' lack of experience with these topics. And as a result, the students has had to pursue something that they may not have been as connected to. And unfortunately, that sends the message that work on race or work on gender or work on oppression is not welcomed in the academy. So what do we do? What do we do with this information now that we have it? So we have some recommendations for departments. One, think about the ways that we assign advisors and advisor and student pairings and using more than research interest. Largely when advisors and students are paired, a major component of that pairing is research interest. But are there other aspects of students' identities that we need to consider as we're making these pairings? Consider faculty development on advising. Oftentimes faculty are not taught how to advise. Similarly, that we're not taught how to teach. Our approach to advising is we advise in the way that we were advised, or you develop a whole new way of being because of the ineffectiveness of your advisor. And so we need to consider how faculty can be developed in the area of advising. Creating space for discussions about advising practices. How can we make sure that faculty are sharing best practices? that faculty are sharing what they may be doing in their individual relationships with students that are working or that they find challenging, and can look to each other as peers to come up with new and creative and innovative solutions to those challenges. Conduct an advising assessment. Ask students about their experiences. This is something that you'll find out that we as a department are embarking on. We want to learn more about what your experiences have been with your advisor in the department, and how can we improve this relationship for you. And then lastly, consider evaluation of advising as a part of faculty annual evaluation. What could this look like in terms of the ways that faculty are assessed and evaluated? How could we make this a part of that evaluation to encourage faculty to take advising more seriously, or to invest that time and energy into improving their advising practice? We got some recommendations for advisors. Assess your advisees using multiple measures. In this, the developmental education project we've been working on, the advisors are now using multiple measures to help students to direct them into the right courses. So what are some multiple measures? Not just your students' GRE scores or their prior work experiences or their prior academic experiences, but are you assessing, or do you incorporate into your relationship or conversations with your students their goals and expectations? What about some of their previous experiences, their previous life experiences? How do all of those things shape what recommendations you may make for students about the path that they should take to finish coursework, or the path that they should take to pursue their dissertation completion? Do you communicate your expectations plainly and clearly, and ask students about their needs and expectations? Oftentimes we expect students to just kind of know how to operate and know what our expectations are without communicating those clearly. And then asking students about their own expectations and needs is important, and helps us to make sure that we're both getting what we both need from this relationship. Locate diverse knowledge if it's not a part of your program, of your or your program's expertise. Do not leave this to the student only to find. I have had many students come to me because there were faculty they didn't have any faculty in their programs that could address their topics about race or about gender or a myriad of topics. And so the students were left on their own to try to find faculty to help supplement that learning that they were not receiving in their departments. And this is part of student agency, of course. At the same time, if you know that there are gaps in your own knowledge, as well as the ways that the department may be able to respond or to support certain students, whether it be based on their identity or their chosen research topics, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are doing the work to make sure that we can address those needs for students. At a minimum, that we can point them in the right direction where they could find that assistance that they need. Decolonizing our advising practices. What does that look like? It looks like challenging. It looks like being more mindful of the ways that we are engaging with our students. And are the ways that we engaging, asking ourselves, are those ways that we are engaging continuing to perpetuate oppression or marginalization for different student populations? Do you require your advisees to only make an appointment with you and those advising appointments are only from 9 to 5 or 8 to 5, and the student has multiple things that they might be juggling? Maybe they work full time and they're unable to adjust their professional schedules to fit meeting your advisor. The time for an advising session is something that's minor that we can easily tweak to meet the needs of our students. Developing a repertoire of advising strategies for diverse students. All of our students are not the same, so they don't all require the same ways of being and communicating. And so as advisors, we need to know that. We need to have a whole toolbox of advising strategies that can work for different groups of students. And then lastly, our recommendation for advisors is about providing clear and detailed feedback about the progress. Oftentimes we have multiple things that we are managing, multiple balls that we're juggling. And so we don't take the time to provide, whether it be detailed and clear directions to students about areas of improvement. Or in the case of the student, are you the advisor who said, that's interesting, that's really ambitious? When really what you want to tell the student is, don't do that. That's way too much work, or that's way too much energy that you need to impart right now. Because this is a relationship, there are recommendations that we have for students as well. So one of them is being honest about your needs and expectations. What do you desire in an advising relationship, and have you communicated that with your advisor? Communicate with your advisor about important personal and professional happenings. Many of our students are working full time, or there are important personal things happening in their lives that have an academic impact. And so making sure that you are communicating with your advisor about those things and how they may be impacting how you're showing up in the classroom. Learn how to ask for, interpret, and respond to feedback. Faculty have different styles of providing feedback. And so you also have different styles and needs as it relates to feedback. So making sure that you feel comfortable asking for feedback, interpreting the different types of feedback that you receive from faculty, and then responding to that particular feedback. Take responsibility or shared responsibility with your advisor for your relationship. As I said before, this is a shared relationship. This isn't just your advisor being there to meet all of your needs, but some of this is your responsibility to communicate to your advisor, particularly if they are not meeting your needs. And then lastly, we would like for you to definitely exhibit some agency and seek out the people or the resources that you might need for your journey. All faculty are not aware of all of the resources that Florida State University even has. And so you might learn about things that could be helpful for other students, sharing that with your advisor, seeking out opportunities, seeking out other people and resources is also important for you in making sure that you are able to get what it is that you need. We wanted to leave some time for us to engage in some dialogue and some questions. You can feel free to drop your questions in the chat, or if you are a little shy about putting a question in the chat, you can use Menti and entering the code here on the screen, and Brittany is fielding those questions. One of the comments in the chat that's decoding subtle culture is tough and unstructured. It's definitely tough, especially if you are unfamiliar with the culture and unfamiliar with what are the traditional modes of communication as well. So there's the decoding of culture piece that can be important and honestly difficult to manage, as well as if the ways of communicating are different than what we are accustomed to, then that adds a whole nother layer of complexity. Patrice, you raised your hand.
There was a question from Jonathan, though. You want to take that first?
Sure. Okay, Jonathan said, you mentioned decolonizing advising. Can you provide any examples of when an advisor might, perhaps unintentionally, be engaging in practices that reinforce systems of oppression? So one of the examples was kind of what we shared in terms of forcing advisees to communicate in certain ways, or to be available at certain times. And these are small things that we think are just about availability, or think about what may work for us or what may work for the advisor. And could be one way that we are continuing to perpetuate inaccessibility for our students. So are you only available at certain times of the day? Another way that advisors engage in this, or could engage in decolonizing, are considering, are there certain resources, are there certain authors or references, citations that you continue to point students in the direction of? Or do you have a broader repertoire of resources, a broader work, a broader understanding of the work in your discipline? Jonathan, let me know if that answered your question. We can definitely come up with a little more examples. Patrice?
So all this makes sense, and I think it's, when we think about advising, oftentimes our default is what I experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the things of what we experienced is really kind of, I mean, I remember we shouldn't take vacations. You know, we didn't have an outside life, or we shouldn't have an outside life. Obviously we did, but we shouldn't. So that's like kind of like this, there's this kind of human development, right? So we should not strive to replicate that. But there's one part that I'm struggle with a little bit in terms of kind of the example on, here's this subject, interesting, you know, I'll be there for you. I don't necessarily agree with that kind of comment from an advisor, but the notion of that, let the student kind of have to discover things on their own in some way. Like there's a part of discovery that I think then makes it a richer, deeper experience. And I don't want it to be a struggle of discovery, but so how do you balance that, if that makes any sense?
Oftentimes what I found for, particularly for students of color, and this comes up a lot for me as an advisor, I've been asked, how should I put it? I've been asked by several students to help them to kind of decode what their advisor is asking them to do. And oftentimes the advisor wants them to figure it out on their own. However, if you are new to this system, you are unfamiliar with how academia works, or even this process of independent discovery has not been a part of everyone's learning process. So one, you're in a new environment, you're in a new situation, and somebody is telling you to go and explore, go and figure it out. You don't even know what you don't know. You don't even know where to go to begin that exploration. So as part of our role as advisors, I think we can be, and this is where I think it pays to know what different students need, and you can respond in different ways. So yes, all of students should be encouraged to explore and to find out on their own. But at the same time, some students may need a little bit more support. And so you might say to one, go read all of these things. But then, okay, what do I do after I read all of these things? So in that case, I have been providing a lot more support. And we talk about this with scaffolding oftentimes in class. And so you tell the student, all right, I would like for you to go and find different articles on, say, their topic is socialization. There's a bunch of different ways that they could go with socialization. They want to look at how organizations participate in socialization. So we say, all right, well, first, why don't you take a look at the socialization literature? Well, the socialization literature is broad. And if you tell a student to go read, well, how do they know what to read? So can you provide a little bit more focused guidance, and without directly telling them what they need to do, but giving them a little bit more structure, a little bit more scaffold, so that the next time when they come back, or for the next level or the next phase of the process, they have a little bit more confidence. They've built up a little bit more confidence, a little bit more understanding of how they can proceed to the next phase. I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's helpful, actually. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up to Patrice's question? Tamara or Brittany, with Black feminists and this disruption and thinking about socialization, a lot of, if you could speak to us as faculty, a lot of us advise the way we were advised or the way we might have wished we were advised, and that's a socialization within itself. And I appreciated what you highlighted on the slide with faculty. Can you speak to us about some of the self-work that has to happen for us to really think more critically about a Black feminist approach to advising? Because sometimes we do things because we've always done them, or other things, until somebody, you know, disrupts that for us. And obviously what you just presented is a disruption for some of us with some of our own socialization. So what does the self-work process look like when thinking about our readjusting or reimagining our own advising approach as faculty?
Brittany, I'll let you jump in if you have something you'd like to add. I have an immediate thought, Cameron, and then Brittany, feel free to jump in. So the first thing is to ask students what's working and what's not working. Oftentimes we don't know. We think that we're doing fine, but we've never asked if folks are fine, or if what we've been doing is working. We assume that it's working because students haven't complained, or because we haven't experienced any resistance. And so oftentimes that resistance comes in kind of oh, I didn't know that you needed this. And I can give you a perfect example of when I was a doctoral student, I was at the dissertation stage. I had no clue of how to proceed. And my advisor wanted to be supportive, but she was very much one of those, you go forward and do it, and then you let me know if you have questions. I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know how to engage in this massive project. And I had a discussion with a couple of friends of mine, and I was expressing my frustration with my advisor not giving me more guidance. And they said, well, have you ever talked to her about what it is that you need? Do you know what you need? And have you talked to her about what it is that you needed? And I said, actually, no. I just expected her to know that I needed this because this was my first time doing this. This was, my, as a first generation doctoral student, there was a lot that I didn't know. And so once I finally I got up the nerve to have a conversation with her and to say, I need this. And I needed it particularly because of my first generation status, but also because I was working full time. And so my pace that I wanted to set was slightly different than, say, a full-time student. And so once we talked about what I needed, she was able to say, okay, well, I can respond to that. So we set up a meeting where we would meet. We got into a really good rotation of, I would give her something one week, we would meet the next week, and she would give me feedback. And so we developed this relationship. Well, let me stop there. We developed this cycle of feedback that was helpful and could help me to make progress. What I felt that it took that I did not know or that I had not even considered was that we hadn't developed that level of relationship where I felt vulnerable, where I could feel, where I felt comfortable being vulnerable, expressing that I didn't know what to do, or I didn't know how to proceed. And so part of that work that we have to do, Cameron, is kind of interrogating our own, how am I communicating? How have I been communicating with this student, with this person? Have I expressed enough interest in them, in what they have going on outside of just this process, so that they can feel comfortable coming to me to say, I don't know how to do this? Have I created that space, that environment? And if not, then what do I need to do to create that space or create that environment so that they feel comfortable to do that? But asking if you don't know, and if you haven't asked your advisees what relationships would they like to have, or how they would prefer to receive communication, or how they would prefer to meet with you, or how often they would like to meet with you. That's a part of that relationship building, where we are really in relationship. And in a relationship, there are two people that have two needs that have to be met. More people, more needs that have to be met. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Just to follow up on that, Cameron's questions and Tamara's response, I think, and I found the recommendation for department incredibly helpful, so thank you. And I think that we as a faculty need to create a space to talk about this advising. I think we currently, the academic culture, see advising is an individual faculty's responsibility. We have to figure it out. If we have a student who is struggling, it's our fault. But yet we don't provide the support into the faculty that, to discuss those, repertoire of advising strategies for diverse students. That's so incredibly important. But we haven't, we've been a faculty for over a decade or two, yet we haven't even had a meeting or two on this incredibly important topic. So both you and I are committed to create that space. And then I think that really helped us kind of reflect on our assumptions, our idea about advising, and then start to learn from one another to help our students and support them.
Building on what you and Cameron have both said, I cannot emphasize that this requires work, and it's not just the work of making time, but it requires work, that heart and head work that we have to do to interrogate some of our own beliefs, some of our own practices, and hearing from students to say, that's actually not that helpful. Where you thought you might have been being helpful, that's actually not what I need. And being willing to respond to that, and maybe recognizing that what I have been doing is not effective, or is not helpful to students. So what can I do to make that change? And just thinking about the ways these different advisor responsibilities and functions. If this is not the way that you thought about your advising practice, then maybe this is a good place to start, to say, do I really serve in this role? Do I feel that I should serve in this role? And if you feel that you don't, you do or you don't, why or why not? As we move forward with this as a part of our departmental priorities, I want to just remind everybody that we're going to be asking, this is the start to I think a very long and hopefully fruitful conversation that we have about creating space in our department where students are able to thrive. We recognize that advising is one part of that experience. We know that while the quotes that we shared are from Black men and Black women about their advising relationships, we know that this perspective has applicability for all students. We want all students to be able to thrive. And so while it is a Black feminist approach, it is an approach that students, regardless of their positionality. We want to make sure that they are able, that we are best serving them in these environments and that they are equipped for success. So what does that look like as we go forward? I mentioned that we will be doing an assessment of advising, or more broadly, your experiences, our students' experiences in the department. And advising is a part of that experience. So we're asking the question, we will be asking the question of you of what has been your experience in the department. And we hope that you feel comfortable to share with us. If you know something, you gotta say something. If something isn't working between you and your advisor, I would encourage you to have a conversation about it, or write a letter if you don't feel, write a letter, it's old school, write an email, set up some, if you don't feel comfortable having that conversation face to face, but assume that your advisor wants to be there for you, wants to be responsive to your needs, and take that initiative to establish that open communication. Secondly, the future R3s, I think, are all going to be connected to these topics. And so our next R3 in October 14th is going to be a panel of FSU faculty from around the university who have started to decolonize their own learning. So they are making changes to their syllabi. They have done some of the heart and the head work, the personal work that they need to do in order to interrogate their own personal practices. And so we'll hear from them about what that looked like. What does that look like in the classroom and outside of the classroom? And how have they been able to move the needle for themselves and for their departments? October 28th is our R3 is about feedback. You know, one of our suggestions was about being able to ask for and to interpret and then to respond to feedback. And as advisors, we need to know how to give good feedback as well. So the session on feedback is for all of us, where we will learn how to give, how to receive, and interpret feedback. And then our last R3 of the semester in November 18th will be Dr. Kakali Bhattacharya, and she'll talk to us about positionality in research. One of the things that we know is that research is not neutral. It's not unbiased in any way. And so how do we acknowledge who we are, and how can we acknowledge who we are as a part of our research process? And not just for the qualitative researchers, the positionality of all of us, of our quant scholars as well, that contributes to the research. And we don't always talk about those ways. And so this conversation will be a start for us to laying that foundation for acknowledging that. So we hope to see you at our future R3s, again, October 14th, October 28th, and November 18th, the same time. Thank you all for coming, and we so appreciate you very much. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and to Brittany. We can share the link actually to the article that this work was based on. And once the next article gets published, we'll make sure to share that one with you, because that one is in underdeveloped right now.